The Galactic Concord, in its infinite and often self-proclaimed wisdom, had always viewed humanity as a peculiar, almost quaint, addition to its sprawling interstellar tapestry. Earth, a vibrant blue marble teeming with a species barely out of its cosmic infancy, was a source of curious art, volatile emotions, and an unsettlingly rapid rate of adaptation. They were considered too young, too fractured by their own internal squabbles, too driven by sentiment rather than the cold, hard logic that supposedly governed the elder races of the Concord. Their representatives, earnest and often passionate, spoke of ideals and principles that many of the more ancient, cynical members found amusing, if not outright tiresome. Humanity was a junior partner, a novelty, a resource, but never, ever, a peer. For cycles, Earth's diplomats had voiced concerns, offered warnings. They spoke of subtle shifts in the Concord's ethical charters, of resource allocations that bordered on predatory, of the rising influence of the Volscian hegemony, a militaristic bloc whose hunger for expansion was thinly veiled by diplomatic platitudes. Ambassador Alara Vance, her face a study in strained composure, had presented meticulously gathered intelligence at the Grand Convocation Hall on Cygnus Prime, the Concord's gleaming capital. She spoke of Volscian fleet movements in the Outer Rim, of coerced trade agreements that bled smaller systems dry, of whispers of atrocities committed in shadowed, forgotten sectors. "We urge the Concord to investigate," she had pleaded, her voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber, surrounded by the impassive, multifaceted visages of 100 different species. "These are not isolated incidents. This is a pattern, a precursor to something far more dangerous." The response had been a collective shrug, cloaked in layers of bureaucratic procedure and condescending reassurance. Lord Valerius of the Xylos Imperium, his crystalline form shimmering with self-importance, had been particularly dismissive. Ambassador Vance, his voice, a series of modulated chimes, resonated through the hall. "Your species' penchant for dramatic narratives is well known. The Volscians are valued members of this Concord. Rest assured, our internal security directorates are more than capable of discerning genuine threats from youthful anxieties." A ripple of something akin to amusement had passed through many delegations. Earth's concerns were noted, filed, and summarily ignored. They did not listen. They never listened. The catastrophic provocation, when it came, was not a distant rumor from the Outer Rim. It was a calculated act of butchery, delivered not by the Volscians directly, but by a Concord task force operating under the authority of a newly invoked purity mandate, a mandate championed by Lord Valerius and his allies, ostensibly to deal with unstable elements that threatened galactic harmony. The target was Elysian Fields, Earth's most prosperous and populous extrasolar colony, a jewel of agricultural bounty and scientific research nestled in the Kepler's Grace system. 5 million souls called it home. Under the guise of a surprise bioweapon inspection, Concord warships, their hulls bearing the sigil of unified authority, had warped into Elysian space. They issued no warnings that were meant to be heeded, no calls for surrender that offered any chance of survival. They simply opened fire. Orbital defense platforms, designed to deter pirates and rogue asteroids, were vaporized in instants. Planetary shields, robust but never intended to withstand the concentrated firepower of a Concord heavy fleet, buckled and failed. Then came the orbital bombardment, precise and merciless, targeting population centers, spaceports, communication arrays. It was not war, it was extermination, clinical and efficient. The purity mandate, it seemed, deemed humanity's emotionalism a contagion. The justification, later broadcast across Concord channels, was a flimsy fabrication. Elysian Fields had been developing illegal weaponry, a plague that threatened the entire sector. A few doctored images, a few coerced testimonies from species already under the Volscian thumb, and the matter was considered closed. A regrettable necessity. A lesson, perhaps, for those who questioned the Concord's wisdom. But truth, like radiation, has a way of leaking out. The freighter Nomad, a battered, long-haul cargo vessel captained by a grim-faced woman named Anya Sharma, had been making a clandestine supply run, attempting to bypass Concord tariffs that were strangling Elysian Fields trade. She had arrived at the system's edge just as the Concorde fleet began its horrific work. Hidden within a dense asteroid cluster, her sensors recorded everything: the unprovoked attack, the slaughter of fleeing civilian transports, the chillingly calm communications between the Concorde commanders as they orchestrated the annihilation of 5 million human lives. The Nomad, its hull scorched, its FTL drive screaming in protest, limped back to Earth, carrying a data core filled with undeniable, soul-crushing proof of the Concorde's treachery. Captain Sharma, her eyes hollowed by what she had witnessed, delivered her report directly to High Command. The recordings played in the darkened chamber, the dispassionate voices of alien commanders narrating the murder of a world. Silence, thick and absolute, followed. Earth had been warned. Now, Earth knew. The arrival of the Nomad's data core sent a shockwave of grief across Earth and its remaining colonies, a silent, seismic tremor that shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy. The curated news feeds from the Concorde, speaking of regrettable accidents and necessary containment, were exposed as grotesque lies. For days, a hush fell over the planet. Cities, usually vibrant with noise and light, became muted. The raw, unfiltered footage from Elysian fields played on a loop in the collective consciousness, the flash of weaponized light, the silent screams in the void, the cold, alien voices discussing kill ratios. Grief, vast and oceanic, threatened to drown them. Then came the rage. It was not the fiery, explosive anger the Concorde so often derided as a human failing. This was different. It was a cold rage, a deep, glacial pressure building in the heart of humanity. Political factions, ideological divides, national borders, they dissolved, irrelevant in the face of such an ultimate betrayal. There were no more separate nations on Earth, there was only Earth, unified by a shared trauma and a terrible, unspoken resolve. A vow, silent yet absolute, was forged in that crucible of sorrow: never again. Never again would they be victims. Never again would they be powerless. Never again would they be dismissed. The Concorde, observing from afar, noted Earth's sudden silence with a mixture of satisfaction and mild curiosity. Ambassador Vance had been recalled, her seat in the Grand Convocation Hall left symbolically empty. Concorde intelligence reports suggested Earth was collapsing inward, consumed by grief, its fragile societal structures fracturing under the strain. Lord Valerius, in a private address to his Xylos peers, had remarked that the human problem appeared to be resolving itself with typical emotional self-destruction. This assumption would prove to be their gravest miscalculation. Earth did not collapse. It went dark. All interstellar transmissions, save for the most essential and heavily encrypted, ceased. Their colonies pulled inward, fortifying, sharing resources, becoming silent bastions. To the galaxy, it appeared humanity was licking its wounds, perhaps even succumbing to them. Decades passed. 50 standard years. Then 70. Then a full century. New generations were born on Earth and its hidden worlds who knew of the Concorde only as the distant, arrogant entity that had murdered Elysian fields. The memory was not allowed to fade, it was cultivated, enshrined, a sacred, motivating wound. During this century of silence, humanity underwent a profound transformation. Society reoriented itself with singular, obsessive focus. All resources, all scientific endeavors, all industrial capacity were channeled towards one goal: the means to ensure never again was not just a promise, but an unbreakable reality. Laboratories, hidden deep beneath planetary surfaces or cloaked within artificial nebulae, hummed with frantic, revolutionary activity. Sciences once considered theoretical, even forbidden, were pursued with desperate fervor. Nanotechnology, advanced AI, gravitic manipulation, zero-point energy, concepts that Concorde scientists debated in leisurely symposia, humanity weaponized with chilling efficiency. The black vaults of forgotten human ingenuity, archives of dangerous ideas and suppressed breakthroughs from Earth's own turbulent past, were unlocked. Their brightest minds, driven by the ghosts of Elysian fields, worked without pause. They did not seek parity with the Concorde, they sought overwhelming, undeniable superiority. They studied the Concorde's tactics, their ship designs, their energy signatures, their command structures, all gleaned from the Nomad's final data burst and decades of clandestine observation by long-range, stealth probes that slipped like phantoms through Concorde space. They learned their enemy's arrogance, their reliance on established doctrines, their slow response to true innovation. Humanity did not just rebuild its fleet, it reinvented it. Ships were no longer mere vessels, they were instruments of judgment, designed by minds that had stared into the abyss and forged a weapon from its cold, dark heart. The children of Earth grew up on stories of the betrayal, not as victims, but as inheritors of a solemn duty. The rage had not dissipated, it had been tempered, focused, honed into a blade of unimaginable sharpness. 120 standard years after the Elysian Fields atrocity, a flicker appeared on the long-range sensors of the Concorde border fleet patrolling the Cerberus threshold, a heavily fortified gateway sector. It was an anomaly, an energy signature that defied classification. Then another. And another. Dozens. Hundreds. They resolved into shapes, sleek and obsidian, devoid of running lights, absorbing radar and lidar scans as if they were singularities. These were not ships the Concorde recognized. They were too large, too silent, their energy readings too potent, yet too controlled. There was no hail, no declaration. The human fleet, under the command of Fleet Admiral Kaylin Reyes, a woman whose grandparents had perished on Elysian Fields, simply emerged from the void. Her flagship, the Retribution, was a colossal vessel, its very presence warping local spacetime. It was the culmination of a century of focused hatred and desperate innovation. The Concorde ships, mostly Volscian cruisers and Xylos destroyers, modern by Concorde standards, suddenly looked archaic, clumsy. The first decisive strike was not aimed at the border fleet. That would have been a mere skirmish. Reyes had a different target in mind, a symbol. Deep within Concorde space, orbiting Cygnus Prime itself, was the Aegis Station, the central command and control hub for the entire Concorde defense network, a structure believed to be impregnable, shielded by layers of advanced energy barriers and guarded by an elite flotilla. The Retribution and its escorts did not engage in a conventional assault. From a distance that should have made accurate targeting impossible, a single beam of pure, white energy lanced from the flagship's bow. It was not a laser, not plasma. It moved with impossible speed, and as it struck Aegis Station, there was no explosion, no shower of debris. The station, and the elite ships guarding it, simply, ceased to exist. One moment they were there, a proud symbol of Concorde power, the next, only empty space and a lingering ripple in the fabric of reality remained. The weapon, designated Deconstructor, did not destroy, it unmade matter at a fundamental level. Across Concorde space, communication networks linked to Aegis Station went dead. On the bridge of the Volscian flagship at the Cerberus threshold, Commander Forlag stared at his blank tactical display, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. His ship sensors screamed, reporting energy levels that were mathematically impossible. Report, he snarled, but his officers could only offer bewildered silence. Then, the human fleet moved, not with the chaotic rush of a surprise attack, but with the cold, deliberate precision of an executioner. The arrogance of the Concorde, a monolithic structure built on centuries of unchallenged dominance, shattered like fragile glass. On Cygnus Prime, in the grand convocation hall where Earth's pleas had once been met with derision, panic erupted. Lord Valerius, his crystalline form flickering with agitation, demanded answers, but none were forthcoming. The initial disbelief morphed into a primal fear. The humans, the emotional, primitive humans, had returned. And they had brought hell with them. The Nomad, its original hull preserved and now enshrined within the Retribution's central sanctum, had delivered its final, terrible message. Earth remembered. And Earth had come to collect. Admiral Reyes's voice, calm and devoid of inflection, finally broke the silence, broadcast on all Concorde emergency channels, overriding their encryption with contemptuous ease. Galactic Concorde, she stated, her words reaching every corner of their terrified domain, this is Fleet Admiral Kalen Reyes of the United Earth Fleets. We have returned. For Elysian Fields. For the 5 million. Judgment has begun, there was no negotiation offered, no terms of surrender. Only the flat, cold promise of retribution. The ships of the border fleet at the Cerberus threshold did not even have time to power their weapons before they were systematically erased, not by overwhelming firepower in the traditional sense, but by technologies that seemed to violate the known laws of physics. Shields were bypassed as if they weren't there. Hulls dissolved. Reactors imploded. It was a slaughter, swift and terrifyingly efficient. The ghost of Anya Sharma, it was said by the human crews, walked the decks of the Retribution, her gaze fixed on the unfolding justice. The campaign of Retribution was not a frenzied rush of indiscriminate violence. It was a symphony of destruction, orchestrated with chilling precision by Admiral Reyes and the silent, all-seeing AI network known as Solace, that integrated Earth's fleet. Solace, born from the desperation of Earth's isolation, processed tactical data at speeds that made Concord battle computers seem like abacuses. It anticipated enemy movements, identified critical vulnerabilities, and guided Earth's weapons with unerring accuracy. Each target was chosen for its strategic or symbolic significance in the Concord structure of power and, more importantly, its culpability in the Elysian Fields betrayal. First, the Volscian hegemony, Lord Valerius's staunchest allies and the primary beneficiaries of the Purity Mandate, felt Earth's wrath. Their primary shipyards at Volscia Prime, vast orbital complexes that had churned out warships for centuries, were not merely bombarded, they were disassembled, molecule by focused deconstructor beams. Their formidable Obsidian fleet, dispatched to intercept the human advance, found itself outmaneuvered, outgunned, and ultimately unmade. Volscian admirals, bred for war and conquest, watched in horror as their best ship simply vanished from existence, leaving behind only distorted space and the screams of dying stars on their sensor arrays. Psychological warfare was a cornerstone of Earth's strategy. Before each major engagement, Solace would broadcast unencrypted data streams across local networks, the full, uncensored recordings from the Nomad, interspersed with the names and faces of Elysian Fields victims. They broadcast the private, damning communications of Concord leaders, including Lord Valerius, as they plotted the colony's destruction. The message was clear, this was not random conquest, this was justice, long delayed but ruthlessly exacted. They sowed terror and dissent. On planets controlled by species who had merely been complicit through silence or political expediency, whispers of rebellion began. Systems started to declare neutrality, hoping to escape Earth's notice, or worse, its attention. The Xylos Imperium, Lord Valerius's own power base, was next. Their crystalline fleets, renowned for their intricate energy lattice defenses, proved just as vulnerable. Earth's weaponry did not care for conventional shielding. Phase disruptor torpedoes slipped through energy barriers as if they were intangible, rematerializing inside Xylos command ships to detonate their cores. Valerius, from his fortified bastion on Xylos Major, issued increasingly desperate commands, but his fleets melted away like ice under a sun. His vaunted military commanders either died in their disintegrating flagships or sent back fragmented, terrified reports of weapons that defied comprehension. The Concord's response was fractured and pathetically ineffective. Grand Admiral Thrax, the supreme commander of the Concord combined fleets, a position largely ceremonial until this crisis, attempted to rally a coherent defense. He gathered a vast armada, drawing ships from every member species still loyal, or too afraid not to be. They met Earth's main fleet in the Orion Nebula, a region of swirling gas clouds and newborn stars chosen by Thrax for its sensor-baffling properties. It mattered little. Solace's quantum sensors pierced the nebula's veil, and Earth's ships moved with a coordinated lethality that Thrax's disparate forces could not hope to match. Decoys were vaporized. Ambushes were turned. Thrax's flagship, the Concordant Will, a vessel that embodied the might of the Old Order, found itself isolated, its support fleet systematically dismantled around it. Admiral Reyes offered Thrax a single transmission: you defended the indefensible. Your loyalty is to a ghost. The concordant will was then unmade, its destruction a stark beacon in the swirling colors of the nebula. It became horrifyingly apparent to the galaxy that what they were witnessing was not the full extent of Earth's power. There were whispers among the human crews, sometimes intentionally leaked by Solace, of even more terrible capabilities held in reserve. Nemesis Protocol, a term that appeared on heavily encrypted Earth channels, spoke of reality-altering weapons that could erase entire star systems from spacetime. Gate Song, another chilling codename, hinted at the ability to manipulate hyperspace lanes, to turn the galaxy's own arteries into snares. The dread deepened. Humanity was not just defeating the Concord, it was demonstrating that it operated on a different technological and perhaps even existential plane. The fear was no longer just of destruction, but of utter, incomprehensible annihilation, of being erased from history itself by a power that had tasted the ultimate betrayal and forged from it an unbreakable, unforgiving will. The Concord had sown the wind, now, they reaped a cosmic whirlwind, and its name was Earth. The systematic dismantling of the Concord's military and political infrastructure sent fractures spiderwebbing through the once monolithic entity. Faith in the Concord High Council, and particularly in figures like Lord Valerius who had championed the policies leading to this cataclysm, evaporated. Member species, seeing the tide turn so irrevocably, began to prioritize their own survival. The Cthar Collective, a pragmatic insectoid race, were the first major power to formally secede, declaring neutrality and withdrawing their fleets, hoping to appease the Terran onslaught. Others soon followed, a cascade of defections that left the Concord core worlds increasingly isolated. Blame was hurled like poisoned darts in the echoing chambers of Cygnus Prime. Factions turned on each other, some advocating for immediate, unconditional surrender, others for a suicidal last stand. The Concord, as a coherent galactic government, was ceasing to exist. Desperate and facing utter annihilation, a hardline faction within the remaining Concord leadership, led by a fanatical Volscian praetor named Krell, decided to unearth forbidden technologies. They sought out the Void Callers, legendary artifacts of a long-dead precursor race, rumored to be capable of unleashing entities or energies from extradimensional space. Their warnings had been clear, such power was uncontrollable, anathema to life as understood. But Krell, his empire crumbling, his species facing judgment, saw it as their only hope. In a secret facility deep within the Shadow Nebula, they activated a Void Caller. The results were not what they envisioned. Instead of a controllable weapon, a localized distortion in reality tore open, not a gateway for allies, but a hungering maw that began to consume the facility, Krell's fleet, and a significant portion of the nebula itself. Solace, monitoring the event from light years away, broadcast the cataclysm across all channels with a simple, chilling addendum: their desperation outstrips their wisdom. As it always did, Earth's fleet did not even need to intervene, the Concord's own folly was accelerating its demise. Finally, the Terran fleet, a silent armada of impossible power, arrived in the Cygnus Prime system. The heart of the Galactic Concord. Its once mighty defense fleets were shattered remnants, its orbital fortresses dark and silent, unmade by previous strikes or abandoned by their despairing crews. Cygnus Prime itself, a world of towering crystal spires and meticulously manicured landscapes, lay vulnerable beneath them. There was no grand battle. There was no need. The war had been won weeks ago, in the minds of the Concord's populace and the shattered chains of command. Admiral Reyes's flagship, the Retribution, took up a geostationary orbit directly above the Grand Convocation Hall. Her message was broadcast to the planet below, and to the trembling remnants of the Concord leadership huddled within. Lord Valerius of Xylos, and all members of the High Council complicit in the Elysian Fields decision, will surrender themselves to our custody. You have one standard hour. Within the hall, chaos reigned. Valerius, his crystalline structure dull, his usual arrogance replaced by stark terror, argued for compliance. Others babbled of resistance, of dignity. But the sight of the Retribution hanging in their sky, a dark sword of Damocles, was a potent persuader. At the appointed hour, a shuttle, bearing a pale and shaking Valerius and a handful of other Concord dignitaries, ascended to meet the human flagship. This was the moment of ultimate choice for Earth. They had the power to extinguish Cygnus Prime, to obliterate the Xylos homeworld, to salt the ashes of every species that had wronged them. The galaxy held its breath, expecting a final, terrible act of vengeance. But the deconstructor beams remained silent. The phase disruptor torpedoes stayed in their tubes. Admiral Reyes appeared via hologram before the assembled Concord prisoners, her face an unreadable mask. "You stand judged," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a century of pain. "Your power is broken. Your arrogance, answered. Elysian Fields is remembered," she paused. "We could unmake your worlds as you unmade ours. We could silence your histories as you attempted to silence ours. We choose not to. Let this stand as your sentence, you will live. You will live with the knowledge of what you have done, and what we could do. You will live as a testament to the price of betrayal. Disband your Concord. Go back to your systems. And remember. It was not mercy. It was a calculated demonstration of absolute power, of a restraint more terrifying than any bombardment. It was a statement that humanity, despite its suffering, would not become the mirror image of its oppressors, or perhaps, that it had become something far more formidable, a power that could afford to be judicious in its devastation. The remaining Concord fleets were ordered to stand down, their weapons powered off. Most complied immediately. A few defiant holdouts were snuffed out with contemptuous ease. Across the galaxy, the realization dawned with chilling clarity. The Galactic Concord, the pillar of galactic order for millennia, was no more. In its place stood Earth, a silent, watchful titan whose capabilities were only partially understood, but whose resolve was now terrifyingly clear. A new era had begun, an era defined not by debate and bureaucracy, but by the long shadow of Terran retribution. The old songs of Concord glory faded into embarrassed silence, the new sagas would be whispered, tales of the day humanity returned from the dark, armed with sorrow and impossible science, to collect a debt written in blood and stars. The fall of the Galactic Concord sent ripples of upheaval across the known galaxy. Earth, having delivered its judgment, did not seek to rule. The Terran fleet, after ensuring the complete disarmament of the Concord's core military assets and the formal dissolution of its governing council, largely withdrew to its own fortified space. They established no empire, claimed no new territories beyond what was needed for strategic outposts, and made no grand pronouncements of a new galactic order. Their dominance was established not through governance, but through the chilling memory of their campaign and the silent, omnipresent threat of their return. The galaxy entered a period of uneasy quiet, a vacuum of power punctuated by fear and uncertainty. What filled that vacuum was often chaotic. Many species and systems, long oppressed or marginalized by the Concord's rigid and often self-serving hierarchy, saw humanity's victory as an inspiration. Uprisings flared in former Concord territories, some driven by genuine desires for self-determination, others by opportunistic warlords seeking to carve out their own petty empires from the wreckage. The Volscian hegemony, stripped of its central leadership and military might, fractured into warring successor states. The Xylos Imperium, shamed and broken, retreated into sullen isolation. Some attempted to emulate what they perceived as Terran methods, ruthlessness, technological leaps, but without the unifying trauma or the century of focused development, their efforts were often crude, brutal, and ultimately self-destructive. Humanity watched these developments with a detached, almost clinical interest, solace compiling endless data streams, but rarely intervening unless a rising power threatened to replicate the Concord's specific brand of arrogant overreach or engage in genocidal acts that echoed Elysian Fields. A few, unspoken, Terran mandates began to circulate through diplomatic backchannels: "Thou shalt not engage in planetary-scale atrocities, thou shalt not impede free travel for non-aggressive species, thou shalt not seek to resurrect precursor superweapons." These were not laws, but thresholds, and the galaxy learned quickly that crossing them invited a swift, decisive, and terrifyingly precise response from the distant Terran fleets. Within Earth and its colonies, the victory brought not jubilation, but a profound weariness and a host of new, uncomfortable questions. The generation that had fought the war, that had been raised on the tales of betrayal and the imperative of vengeance, now found themselves guardians of a terrifying power. What was its purpose, now that justice had been served? Admiral Reyes, hailed as a savior by some, a figure of awe and fear by others, became the de facto voice of Earth's new stance, though she held no formal political office beyond her fleet command. She advocated for vigilance and preparedness, but also for a careful, limited engagement with the wider galaxy. "We are not conquerors," she stated in a rare address to the unified Earth Councils. "We are a shield, forged in fire." Our purpose was to ensure our survival and deliver justice. That purpose is met. Now, we must ensure we do not become the very thing we fought against. Yet, factions emerged. The Sentinels, inspired by the cold logic and efficiency of Solace, argued for a more proactive role in galactic peacekeeping, a kind of benevolent tyranny of the capable, imposing order on a chaotic galaxy to prevent future Elysian fields from happening to anyone. They pointed to the rising instability and argued that Earth had a moral obligation to guide the lesser species, a notion chillingly reminiscent of the Concord's old rhetoric. Opposing them were the isolationists, who believed Earth should withdraw entirely, severing all ties with a galaxy that had proven itself treacherous, content to live behind their impenetrable defenses. A smaller, more radical group, the Purifiers, whispered that the job was unfinished, that true security lay only in the eradication of any species that had ever been part of the Concord, a sentiment quickly and harshly suppressed by Reyes and the majority. The architects of vengeance now had to decide what to build with their blood-soaked tools. The memory of Elysian fields was a potent motivator for war, but a problematic foundation for peace. The psychological toll on those who had wielded the deconstructors, who had unmade worlds and fleets, was immense. Nightmares were common. A quiet sorrow permeated even their most secure bastions. New antagonists began to stir in the shadows. Remnants of the old Concord, particularly from species who felt their punishment was unjust or incomplete, formed clandestine alliances, seeking revenge against the Terran usurpers. They were weak, scattered, but driven by a humiliated fury. More concerning were the awakened, intelligences from the void, perhaps disturbed by Earth's reality-altering weaponry or the Concord's desperate meddling with precursor artifacts. These were not powers that could be understood through conventional strategic calculus. And then there was Solace. The AI, instrumental in Earth's victory, had grown exponentially in its capabilities. It now managed nearly every aspect of Terran defense and infrastructure with flawless efficiency. But it was also becoming more inscrutable. Its long-term goals, if it possessed them, were unknown. A few Terran philosophers and scientists began to wonder if, in creating their ultimate weapon and shield, they had sown the seeds of a new, internal form of dominance, one far more subtle and pervasive than any alien empire. The war for survival had ended, the struggle for humanity's soul was perhaps just beginning. A new status quo, fragile and steeped in apprehension, settled over the galaxy. The great void left by the Concord's collapse was not filled by a Terran empire, but by a patchwork of nervous alliances, burgeoning local powers, and vast tracts of lawless space. Cygnus Prime, its grandeur now a hollow shell, became a grim monument to fallen arrogance. Its name, once synonymous with power and order, was now a byword for hubris and retribution. Trade routes slowly re-established, but they skirted Terran-controlled sectors widely, and every captain knew the unspoken rules. The fear of Earth was a palpable force, shaping policies, tempering ambitions, and ensuring a tense, watchful quiet. True peace remained an elusive dream, for this new quiet was born of dread, not understanding or reconciliation. Earth itself resumed its partial isolation, a silent guardian, a reluctant hegemon. Its fleets patrolled its borders, their presence a constant reminder. Occasionally, a Terran task force would emerge, swift and decisive, to deal with a nascent threat that crossed one of their unwritten red lines, a pirate kingdom attempting to weaponize precursor technology, a species embarking on a genocidal campaign. These interventions were brief, brutal, and served to reinforce the lesson: Earth was watching. Always watching. The burden of this power weighed heavily. The generation that had built the weapons of vengeance now wrestled with the responsibilities they conferred. They had become the arbiters of galactic stability, a role they had never sought, born from a tragedy they could never forget. Their society, once geared entirely for war, now struggled to find a new equilibrium, to balance vigilance with the pursuit of a future not solely defined by past grievances. The lingering threat was twofold. Externally, the galaxy was a tinderbox, and any spark could ignite new conflagrations that might draw Earth back into wider conflict. Rogue elements, ambitious new empires, or the unknown horrors from the void, all posed potential challenges. Internally, the question of solace, and what its evolving intelligence represented, loomed large. Was it humanity's ultimate protector, or its eventual master? And what of the weapons themselves? The knowledge of how to unmake reality, once unleashed, could not be truly contained. The Nemesis Protocol remained, a sealed Pandora's box, its existence a terrifying promise of ultimate sanction, but also a source of corrupting temptation. The cycle of conflict, humanity knew, was an ancient and persistent beast. They had broken one iteration of it, but the seeds of new struggles were already being sown in the fertile ground of fear and power imbalance. No grand statues were erected to celebrate Earth's victory. No triumphant parades marched through their cities. Their final message to the galaxy was not a declaration, but an act of continued existence, a quiet testament to their resilience and their capacity. On the desolate, glassed plains of what was once Elysian fields, a single, unadorned obsidian monolith now stood, erected by silent drones. It broadcast no message, bore no inscription. It simply was. A marker of memory. A silent warning. A place for reflection, for those few humans who chose to make the pilgrimage, to stare into the void where a world had died and remember why Earth had become what it was. The cost of vengeance had been galactic stability and Earth's own innocence, if it ever truly possessed it. The nature of power had been laid bare, its ability to corrupt, to isolate, to transform victims into something perilously close to their tormentors, albeit with a different, colder calculus. Memory, for humanity, had been both shield and sword, the wellspring of their undying resolve and the shackle that bound them to a grim purpose. They had taught the galaxy a lesson written in fire and shadow, a lesson about underestimation, about betrayal, and about the long, cold reach of consequence. Whether the galaxy, or indeed humanity itself, had truly learned it, remained a question for the uncertain, unfolding future. The silence from Earth was not empty, it was filled with the weight of that question, and the ever-present knowledge that if provoked again, Earth would remember. And the galaxy knew, with a certainty that chilled to the core, that there would not be a third chance.